When Russia and the US agree on something, you know it must be serious. Load error this week, the US Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John Kerry traveled quietly to Moscow to meet with his Russian counterpart, Ruslan Edelgeriev. His aim was not to talk about the usual thorny issues, cyber attacks and election meddling, but a bigger, more existential threat that will affect them both: climate change. US-Russia relations tumbled to a low point under the presidency of Donald Trump. Not much has really improved, yet Kerry's trip to Moscow, so early on in the Biden presidency, is a notable sign the Cold War foes could get on the same page about this one thing, if little else. Lola Vallejo, the climate program director at the Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations, said the announcement was a testament to Biden's commitment on climate. They're willing to overcome a very difficult bilateral situation to still have a very high-level communication channel on this topic, Vallejo told CNN. But Kerry's visit also illustrated a major shift in Russia's climate policy. In terms of climate action, Russia is usually seen as a blocker in international negotiations, Vallejo said. So even if, at this stage, it's merely a change in discourse, it's still positive that there is such a high-level conversation on the importance of climate change and a reaffirmed commitment. The rise in temperatures did bring Russia some economic benefits. The shrinking of the Arctic ice has opened up new shipping routes for Russia and enabled natural resources exploration in previously inaccessible areas. Warmer temperatures in some parts of the country made the growing seasons longer, boosting agricultural production. There's also less need for heating as the number of cold days decreases. But Moscow's calculation is beginning to change as Russia increasingly experiences firsthand the devastating effects of climate change. The impacts of climate change have become far more pressing and acute and obvious to even those governments that were not necessarily minded to pay attention to them, Vallejo said. And while it's hard to say how sincere Russia is and how much the actions are actually going to move forward, it's fair to say that there's probably a more authentic sense of urgency and alarm regarding climate change. The announcement that Russia and the US expressed desire to work together is encouraging. But in climate policy, action matters. And Russia hasn't yet aligned its new climate enthusiasm with its actions. They are using the language of climate so much more in their official rhetoric, their strategic documents, but the problem is their implementation is going in the opposite direction. They're doubling down on fossil fuel production over the next decade, said Heather Conley, the director of the Europe, Russia and Eurasia program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Russia depends on its oil and gas industry for about a third of its federal budget. The sector is key for its finances, but also its role in the region as a major energy supplier has helped Russia maintain its influence over Eastern Europe after the end of the Cold War. While Russia has joined the Paris Climate Agreement and agreed to lower its carbon emissions, albeit by nowhere near enough to bring it in line with its Paris pledge, it is certainly not planning to phase out fossil fuels anytime soon. It's perhaps no surprise that Kerry and Edelgeriev made no concrete climate announcements this week. Getting Russia to adjust its economic model, in my view, is a fool's errand, Conley said, suggesting instead that any cooperation between the two countries will likely focus on climate change mitigation, tackling issues like wildfires or thawing permafrost. We have excellent permafrost thaw engineers, so does Russia. We are both equally challenged and our scientists and our engineers can work together to find collaborative solutions, she said. But Russia is also aware that climate change is increasingly dominating global political discussions and that if it doesn't get involved, it risks being left behind. Vallejo said Russia's current engagement on climate might be motivated by pragmatism. I don't think Russia suddenly discovered it had a huge interest in the fate of the planet, but it speaks to the fact that climate change has become a real concrete geopolitical issue, she said. Putin wants Russia to be seen as a global power and climate could be his way back into the global community. He is at the table, he is not isolated, he is talking about these big issues, he is using the language, saying that Russia understands the changes coming, but he is absolutely not prepared to take any of the internal action that is required. In the climate community, that kind of attitude has a name. It's called greenwashing.